been a while since I've done one of these. It's been a hot minute, but hopefully I can make it up to you by doing a retrospective review of the wonderful, whimsical, lavish, lush, ornate, and beautifully crafted 2005 album from Sufjan Stevens titled Illinois. This album was not only a very important milestone in the Sufjan Stevens canon, but it is also a very important watershed moment for chamber pop in the 2000s. In my opinion, it signified the last true great chamber pop, genuine chamber pop album. Certainly there are other chamber pop releases, but the trend definitely died down once Sufjan kind of released this magnum opus. There were artists in the 2000s that were putting out some really great chamber pop albums, such as the 2004 Arcade Fire album Funeral, their debut album, which needs a video on its own, I know that. In the more indie rock fashion, you had a couple albums from Destroyer that was chamber pop oriented, such as Street Hawk, A Seduction. Owen Pallett was putting out a couple albums under the Final Fantasy name, as well as Rufus Wainwright, but those artists were just as influenced as their 90s contemporaries. Most notably Tinker Sticks, as well as Belle and Sebastian. You also had those artists be influenced by artists such as the most legendary Beach Boys. You also can't talk about chamber pop without even mentioning Phil Spector, so there's the mention. I can go on and on and on and on about chamber pop and how it was great and how it's kind of died down. I mean, there's some great, amazing, wonderful chamber pop that has made it into the 2010s. You have artists that took that sound of the 2000s chamber pop, reinvented it for the 2010s decade. Artists such as Julia Holter, who put out a fantastic 2015 album, Have You In My Wilderness. Radiohead toyed with the sound on their 2016 album, A Moon-Shaped Pool, as well. But in my opinion, nothing really comes close to the near perfection and flawlessness that is Illinois, despite it having a lot of flaws. Now, I don't feel necessarily comfortable talking about Illinois without talking about its predecessor, Michigan, which was the start of a once teased 50-state album plan where Sufjan Stevens would talk about in great detail, like Illinois, Michigan, about every single state in the United States. Looking at Michigan, you might notice a lot of similarities with that album and this project. It's kind of like Sufjan Stevens made, produced, recorded, and put out these two projects around the same time. They have a lot of comparable characteristics. And while Michigan is not as long as this album, it's just as ambitious and as rich as this project can be. But after the release of Illinois, he threw that idea out the window and said it was kind of a joke. Whether or not you believe or don't believe Sufjan is up to you. What you should believe, however, should, not must, but should, is that this record is undeniably lavish, beautifully constructed, and a wonderful expression of chamber pop and singer-songwriter music. Given that this record is, in fact, a concept album about the state of Illinois, you're gonna have a lot of nods about the history of Illinois, characters and people from Illinois, such as Abraham Lincoln, Mary Todd, as well as the killer clown John Wayne Gacy, Carl Sandburg, Stephen A. Douglas. You also have nods to cities such as the infamous Chicago, as well as Jacksonville, Metropolis, Decatur, Highland, and a few others. Events in this wonderful state such as the Black Hawk War, the UFO sighting in the city of Highland, or CASIMIR Pulaski Day, which is not only something I wish I was pronouncing correctly, but it is a state holiday only celebrated in the state of Illinois, and it has a parade and a festival attached to it. Now, on the surface, this album might seem like a history book or a history lesson of the state of Illinois, but there are also subtle nods to Christianity and the Bible, much like a lot of early Sufjan Stevens material. Most notably on the track The Sears Tower, talking about a manual being in the sky, relating that to what was known as the Sears Tower, now it's known as the Willis Tower. We still call it the Sears Tower. The track The Man of Metropolis Steals Our Hearts, which on the surface a nod to Superman, but underneath everything, it is portraying Superman as a godlike figure. But most importantly, this album is as informative as it is introspective. This is, of course, a Sufjan Stevens album, so it has to wrap back to him in some way, shape, or form, which it does a lot of the time. While the track John Wayne Gacy Jr. talks about John Wayne Gacy Jr., at the end there is an amazing line that says, "And in my best behavior, I am really just like him. Look beneath the floorboards for the secrets I have hid." Relating kind of like skeletons in the closet to how John Wayne Gacy would bury his victims. It is a kind of grotesque and weird way to put personal conflict into a song, but it works in some weird way. This is all done over a very somber piano-backed and guitar-ridden instrumental that makes the song kind of calming, but there is such a devastating tone to this track. The track Chicago is probably the most personal to Sufjan Stevens, and almost talks nothing about Chicago and just talks about his trip to New York. There's a nice refrain in the chorus of the track where there's some choral vocals that are in the background trying to help Sufjan Stevens with this song. Sufjan Stevens made a choir for songs on this album just so that there could be some really nice harmonizing vocals in the background. This song in particular, as well as the track The Black Hawk War, or blah blah blah. Which brings me to another point on this album. The titles of these songs are incredibly long, like the second track, or the track A Short Reprise for Mary Todd Who Went Insane, but for very good reasons. The predatory wasp of the Palisades is out to get us, and The Tallest Man, the Broadest Shoulders, Part 1, and it goes on and on and on. These song titles are very detailed. It's as if Sufjan Stevens tried to pack these songs with as much information as possible, but it was just overflowing, so he just put the rest of the information in the title. There is one thing I haven't talked about yet, and that is the production and just the instrumentation across this entire record, which for the most part was done by Sufjan Stevens himself, but he also incorporated the help of a few others. But the amount of work and everything he did on his own in this project is so admirable. He was, of course, the vocals, he did acoustic guitar, piano, he did electric bass, he of course had the drum kit, electric guitar, oboe, saxophone, flute, banjo, glockenspiel, accordion, recorder, sleigh bells, tambourine, triangles, church bells, organs. He was the recording engineer, he was the songwriter, he was the arranger, he was the producer, he laid out everything, he designed everything. He had a huge hand in his own album, which makes sense, but he did most everything on this project, which doesn't sound like a lot nowadays, given some recent events today that people have decided to go their own way to make albums. But for how well all of the songs and instruments sound on nearly every track, it sounds immaculate. It sounds like it was professionally done. Like the gentle but chilling pianos on the opening track, or the regal strings on the track Jacksonville. The jauntiness of the instrumental on the track Chicago is something that is undeniable. Or even the following track, which is mostly banjo, and even though the instrumental on this song isn't the most stellar, the songwriting is still potent. There's also this amazingly dreadful tone on the track The Sears Tower. It almost reminds me of the track Say Something, which I know like this album predates that song heavily, but it definitely sounds like Say Something took cues from this song. Shout out to the upbeat and uplifting instrumental on the track The Tallest Man, the Broadest Shoulders, and the lavish and almost orchestral, larger-than-life instrumental on the outro of the song, which coasts us out of the album. There is so much on this album to talk about. The synthesizers, the guitars, the banjo, the pianos, the strings, the horns, everything. The fanfares, the drums, the vocals, the songwriting. This is an ambitious but flawed musical achievement. I say flawed because it has this homemade appeal about it, despite it sounding very professional. Sometimes you can hear Sufjan Stevens count up into a track. Sometimes the subtle instrumentals on tracks are almost like an overt nod to the homemade quality of this album. What's impressive about Illinois is that it's incredibly engaging, despite it being 22 tracks long at well over an hour. Granted, some of these songs are more or less interstitial moments from one track to the next. The shortest song on here is One Last Woohoo for the Pullman, which is just 6 seconds. And there are a handful of tracks that don't even breach the 1 minute or 2 minute mark. Despite that though, there are other songs on this album that are well over 6 minutes. What's also great about this record is, specifically every time you listen to it, it's like another sense of discovery. It's you finding out more and more and more about an album, and more and more and more about the people of Illinois, or just the state of Illinois. You also get to find out more about Sufjan Stevens himself as a person, but that's really true for all of his albums. Once you listen to this album, it's not hard to see why so many people love it. I personally love this album to bits and pieces. It is a fantastic record that is lavish, ornate, beautiful, and almost sweet to the ears, but heavy on the heart. Of course, this can't come from the mind of anyone but Sufjan Stevens. His methodology in going into projects like this is very one of a kind. And like I said earlier, despite it sounding on the surface like a history lesson of the state of Illinois, it is wonderfully captivating, beautifully placed, and beautifully put together, and a must listen for the genre of chamber pop. Really, this is a very well-textured, multifaceted album that deserves to be listened to at least once. And when you listen to it, and you listen to it all the way through, and you're like, it's alright, at least you can say you gave it a try. But for me personally, I love this album, and hopefully I will continue to love this album in the future. I have nothing but nice things to say about this project, and hopefully I will be the same way for his latest album, which is coming out in September. But until then, I hope you enjoyed. Leave a like, comment, share, do whatever you want. Let me know how I can improve future videos down below. Remember, this is only my opinion, because music is subjective.